If you want to know the secrets of existence and the true meaning of life, I can't help you. But if you want some book recommendations, why not try reading the ones I wrote? If you're a fan of giant monster mayhem and anime weirdness, why not try Operation Red Dragon: The Daikaiju Wars Part 1? If horror is more your style, you can't go wrong with The Occult Mafia. Those who enjoy their fantasy with a dark twist may be interested in Emerald of Maddox City. And if you're interested in shared universes, why not read all three? Hop on down to the description for links to all three books on Amazon. Enjoy whichever ones you read, and enjoy the video. Hello ladies and gentlemen, I am the Omni viewer, and I'd like to open this video with a question. Suppose I am in a public area, and I see an individual struggling to carry a veritable mountain of heavy suitcases. He is struggling to keep them all balanced and held up, but his knees are buckling and he just can't hold it anymore. He's about to just cave in and be crushed by the sheer weight of it. So in response to seeing this, I grab 3 of my lightest duffel bags, burn 2 of them, and partially empty the contents of the 3rd. Does that mean I help the individual struggling with the heavy suitcases? I pose that question because it is analogous of something going on over at Warner Brothers, particularly when it comes to the Looney Tunes. As you may have noticed, there's been some controversy surrounding the Looney Tunes as of late, one of which is slightly older than the other 2. You see, Warner Brothers has been doing some things to change up the Looney Tunes a little. They've been making decisions that have garnered some controversy. The first decision they made was back when Looney Tunes cartoons, the latest incarnation of these characters, debuted on the streaming channel HBO Max. And that was the decision to no longer have Elmer Fudd and Yosemite Sam use guns. They could use any other sort of weapon apparently, but they were not allowed to use firearms. No rifles, no 6-shooters, no projectile weapons of any kind. They were taking a stand against gun violence, and so these characters were not allowed to have guns anymore. The second decision was to completely redesign Lola Bunny for her appearance in Space Jam: A New Legacy, or Space Jam 2 as it is sometimes known for short. Her new design, as you can see here, seriously de-emphasizes her originally feminine figure. Before she looked like this, with an hourglass figure to her body. Now she has a body that's almost the same as Bugs' body, just with slightly wider hips. And the third decision was to censor Pepe Le Pew. And not only was his only scene removed from Space Jam: A New Legacy, but he is no longer going to appear in any new Looney Tunes projects for the foreseeable future. These are all very poor decisions, and I would like to espouse on why they are poor decisions, because plenty of people are just yelling it's censorship or it's cancel culture, but they're not really getting into the nitty-gritty of why these are bad decisions. Or sometimes they do and they're not really quite on point. But I'm going to be as on point as I can. Alright, let's start with Yosemite Sam and Elmer Fudd. You see, I understand why this decision was made because it is a political one. The political left has been very anti-gun as of late. Hollywood is mostly politically left, therefore Hollywood is mostly anti-gun. But it doesn't really make sense for them to remove these guns. The idea is that they don't want to promote gun violence. It's just a permutation of an idea from years ago that's been around, which is cartoons that might be seen by children cannot feature any sort of violence that might be replicatable with things you would find around the house. So you don't necessarily want to show characters using guns because there were American households that had guns, and therefore you don't want some kid getting it in his head to use a gun based on what he saw in a cartoon. Now, of course, there's also something to be said about parents taking responsibility and teaching their children the importance and dangers of having a gun around, but that's not really the point of this video. The point is, they took away Sam and Elmer's guns specifically for that reason. However, having watched Looney Tunes cartoons, the decision is completely irrational and ultimately a hollow gesture. Because Looney Tunes cartoons is actually the most violent the Looney Tunes have been in a very long time. Not that it's R-rated blood and guts kind of violence, though it gets close on occasion. But it's definitely up there. It's still in line with the sort of humor that the classic Looney Tunes would have done, and you get the sense that if the original crew, the Chuck Joneses and the Friz Freelings and all of those guys who worked on the original shorts had had that kind of freedom, they might have gone in that direction and pushed it a bit more, but it's still more than what we've ever seen the Looney Tunes actually do. And not having guns be part of that doesn't make any sense. I've been watching it with my family since I signed up for HBO Max because Godzilla vs. Kong is coming and there's no guarantee I'll be able to see it in theaters. Hopefully I will, but that's a tangent. We've been watching it and we've actually made practically a game out of every time something incredibly violent happens in an episode, we say, well, at least there are no guns. And it truly is ridiculous, the sort of stuff they show and yet don't want to show guns. Yosemite Sam can have his skin ripped off of his skeleton, then have that empty skin land on a post where crows suddenly land on it and start pecking at it, but at least he wasn't shot. Dynamite is used to blow characters up at least once every episode, but it's a good thing none of them were hit with a bullet. Elmer Fudd at one point is tormented by Bugs by being forced to walk across a hot surface barefoot, and then Bugs puts stuff in his way, like thumbtacks immediately followed by lemon juice. Then you get a nice close-up of the thumbtacks sticking out of Elmer's bare feet. But good Lord, it is such a relief that he didn't have a gun pointed at him. Do you see how ridiculous it is? They have bladed weapons, but they don't have guns. Now, there is a cannon that shows up at one point, which is not replicatable. Most American households don't have cannons in them, but the damage that the cannon does is exactly the kind of damage a gun would have done. When you get blasted by a gun in a Looney Tunes cartoon, all it does is darken your face with gunpowder. Maybe if you're Daffy Duck, it rearranges your beak. But it's a cartoon. It's presented as just as slapsticky as everything else. And it doesn't make sense that you would have all of this other violence amped up more than it's ever been before, but no guns. It is a hollow gesture. You are not actually, it's a mixed message at best. You're saying that there's all kinds of other violence that's okay, but this specific kind of violence is where you draw the line. And furthermore, it's also kind of missing the point. Yes, Yosemite Sam and Elmer Fudd try to use guns as weapons. Have they ever been effective at it? Not in any cartoons I've seen. The whole idea is that even though a gun is considered one of the most powerful things a person can have, a weapon in which they can wield power over others, it doesn't do these two any good. The most they can do is just impotently blast something and then just get frustrated that it didn't have any sort of effect, or get frustrated by the fact that they got blasted. So you could even take that so far as to say it's mocking the very idea of people who put all of their stock in having guns. So consider the joke thoroughly missed. Rather than go in order and jump straight to Lola, I'm instead going to address the issue of Pepe Le Pew first. As you've no doubt heard, Pepe Le Pew is gone. He's not going to be in Space Jam 2, he's not going to be in any future Looney Tunes projects, at least as of this point. And the idea behind that is because of an article, of course, that purports that Pepe Le Pew is normalizing rape culture. The idea that if a man makes advances towards a woman and the woman says no, that no doesn't really mean no and the man can just still go after her anyway. Now, this same article also tries reviving the idea of Speedy Gonzales being an offensive Mexican stereotype, because that worked out so well the first time. I've already said my piece on that. Go follow the links to that video if you want to know more. So I'm not going to focus on Speedy. I'm instead going to focus exclusively on Pepe Le Pew. Here's the thing. First of all, let's start with the fact that he was removed from Space Jam 2. Do you know what his scene is? The scene he would have been in involves him forcefully coming on to a woman, as he always does, and getting rejected, like he always does. And then LeBron James lectures him on how he's not supposed to do that sort of thing. You can't just go up and kiss a woman without her consent, bro. And it's basically about Pepe Le Pew being told what he does is wrong. So they removed a scene that tells people it's not right to make aggressive advances towards women. I don't even have words for that. They literally took out the message that they wanted to put forward. How do you actually do that? But at the same time, that scene demonstrates that the filmmakers really didn't understand the joke about Pepe Le Pew. You see, I could make all sorts of arguments and reference all the cartoons in which Penelope Pussycat turns the tables on Pepe, which would make her just as guilty of sexual assault as he is being deemed guilty of. Or examples where they actually have a mutual attraction to each other. Or I could also ask if we're going to treat Fifi LaFume, his female protege, the same way when the Tiny Toons reboot comes along. She does the exact same thing to guys. I mean, are we going to hold her to that same standard? But there's something even stronger, an even better argument that I can make. And rather, I'm not even making it. I'm rather reiterating it to you. Because the daughter of Chuck Jones, and I will provide a link to this article if you want to read it yourself, she came forward and spoke about this. Chuck Jones, of course, came up with the idea of Pepe Le Pew, and according to this article, now, Chuck Jones's daughter, she's very against this idea. She thinks that, yes, Pepe Le Pew is aggressive, certainly, but he's never actually raped anyone, for starters, and moreover, he's meant to be a caricature, and this is the actual trick here. The character of Pepe Le Pew was based on someone Chuck Jones actually knew. Someone who fancied himself as a real ladies' man, but really just came across as a creeper. He was being caricatured as this skunk. Pepe Le Pew is an outright satirical condemnation of the kind of behavior that people think he's perpetuating. That's the joke. And the scene in Space Jam doesn't get that. It's actually explaining the joke, which means there is no joke. So Pepe Le Pew is not who you think he is. This is sort of like that one Pokemon, I don't recall the name of it, but it was this one. The one that everyone thought was a blackface caricature and tried to condemn Pokemon for it, when it turned out it was actually based on a creature from Japanese mythology that just coincidentally happens to look like a blackface caricature, and in reality there's nothing actually offensive about it at all. It's just a mythological reference. And this is why you don't jump the gun on these kind of things and demand censorship and cancellation. If you actually do the research, you might actually find out that what you perceive to be wrong isn't wrong at all. And that finally brings us to Lola Bunny and her desexualization. Now, I'm going to have to tread carefully here because the automatic perception among most people is that if you're going to defend Lola Bunny having curves, that must make you some kind of perverted freak. Now, I've already said an extensive piece about what I think it means to anthropomorphize animals for fiction. Again, I'll provide a link. It's called An Author's Take on Anthropomorphic Animals. Part of my thesis there is that anthropomorphic animals are a form of visual shorthand for describing the base personality of a particular character. And that's because we as human beings associate certain character traits with animals. Sly as a fox, strong as a bull, drinks like a fish, cruel as a viper, that sort of thing. But in the case of Lola Bunny, who, from her neck to her ankles, looks far more human than your average anthropomorphic animal, especially among the Looney Tunes, maybe it's just being done to be perverted, but I personally think there's something else going on. It's an extension of that visual shorthand. Look at Lola's original design. Just looking at this, even if you've never seen Space Jam before, you can immediately tell two things about her. First of all, with that hourglass figure, she's clearly meant to be sexy. We recognize the physical traits that we as humans would deem attractive in a woman, so we would automatically understand why Bugs Bunny would have eyes for her. But at the same time, that figure is petite, and she looks rather strong, not overly muscular, but very fit. So that tells us she's athletic. And those are two of her key traits in Space Jam. She is attractive, yes. She is also athletic. She's the only character other than Michael Jordan who actually knows how to play basketball the right way. And she's very good at it too. So again, even if you've never seen the movie, just looking at that image, you can instantly tell at least two things about who Lola Bunny is. Now, her design has changed over the years. When she appeared in the Looney Tunes show, she looked like this. Still had a clearly feminine form, but it was redesigned to fit a bit more with the show's style, and it wasn't meant to be as sexual looking because she wasn't meant to be a sexy character this time around. She was meant to be attractive, sure, but not in such a way that Bugs would overlook her personality in this show, which was just completely backguano insane. Then when she eventually appeared in new Looney Tunes, she looked like this. Even less emphasis was put on making her look sexy. She still has a feminine form, sure, but that's more just to denote her as female, because in this series she was meant to be a female Bugs Bunny. Same exact role, just she was female instead of male. So with those gradual design changes over time, you could argue that her new design in Space Jam: A New Legacy was just a natural progression of where her character was going and how it was physically developing. You could say that, if not for the fact that it was outright stated why she was redesigned, and she was redesigned specifically because the filmmakers did not want her to be seen as a sexual being. They didn't want to have her be the sex object like she was in Space Jam. They wanted her to be seen as a strong, independent woman character who would be a good role model. And yet again, I feel like the point was missed, but in order to properly explain why, I need to talk about a completely different cartoon. A few years ago, the Powerpuff Girls was rebooted. The original show, of course, was one of Cartoon Network's most popular shows of the late 90s and early 2000s. It, in fact, was one of the shows that put Cartoon Network on the map as a new TV juggernaut in producing original content. So naturally, in an age where there are no original ideas and everything is getting rebooted, the Powerpuff Girls was rebooted as well. But there were many controversial decisions made, by which I mean there were many bad decisions made, as they eventually turned out to be. It was undeniable. The show isn't even on anymore, so clearly there were very few good decisions made. But one of those bad decisions was the removal of Miss Cerebellum. Cerebellum, in the original show, is the mayor's assistant, and she is only ever seen from the neck down. We never see her face. Part of that is because most of the time we're following around characters who are really, really short, and she is really, really tall, but other times it's clear there's no excuse for us not to see her face other than because the camera angle just isn't focused on it. Instead, it's focused on her dynamite figure. She has a very attractive body. That's how she's drawn. And the reason she was removed from the reboot is because the showrunners felt she would send a negative message to children, that she would set an unrealistic body type, and what they really needed were good female role models, and Miss Bellum just didn't fit that role. And that just demonstrated that the showrunners completely missed the point. As you can possibly derive from her name, Cerebellum is one of the smartest and most competent characters in the city of Townsville. She's practically the one who keeps the city running. The fact that we never see her face is part of the joke. The camera's perspective is always on her body because that's what most people would probably be focused on, so they wouldn't ever think about her mind and her abilities, even though her abilities and her mind and her intelligence are always on display whenever she shows up. And the fact that the showrunners didn't see that and instead decided to focus entirely on how she looked means they are exactly the kind of people that the original Powerpuff Girls was indirectly mocking. And of course, tangentially related to this, another character, Miss Keane, was drawn like this in the original show, with clear breasts visible through her sweater. She wasn't really drawn to be as sexual as Miss Bellum, certainly, but you could clearly see those two C's on her chest and what they were meant to be. She looked like this in the reboot. Why were they removed? I don't know. I'm not the person who decides whether or not a woman should stay on a show based solely on her looks. So what we saw happen with the Powerpuff Girls is kind of like what happened with Lola. They couldn't just remove her from the movie, of course, because they wanted to have a female character in there. But they didn't want her to be objectified, so they redesigned her. But the fact that they were focusing entirely on her being a sex object means they missed the point of her character in that original film, which is that she was already a strong female character. She was the most competent player on the team other than Michael Jordan. She didn't take any nonsense from any of the characters. Bugs was clearly clay in her hand. The irony is that even though they redesigned Lola with the intent of saying you don't need to be sexually attractive in order to be considered a good and competent person, instead what they were saying is that being attractive or being competent is an either-or choice. They're mutually exclusive. You cannot be both at the same time, even though the original Lola clearly was both at the same time. So pretty much across the board, in every single instance that Warner Brothers has made some kind of alteration to the Looney Tunes in the hopes of getting with the times and moving along with society, they've only demonstrated that the people currently in charge don't understand what they've got. They don't understand the material they're working with. But even if, I say if, all of that stuff could be countered in some way, there's one last question I have to ask. What does the removal of these different elements actually do? Remember the question I started this with? I set up a scenario where I see someone struggling with heavy luggage, and so in response to that, I burn some of my own luggage. Does doing that actually help the person struggling with luggage? I could certainly try and twist it that way. I could say that by getting rid of my own luggage, that's less luggage for that guy to handle. But so what? Who said he was ever going to handle that stuff to begin with? And ultimately, the problem still exists. He's still weighed down by this stuff, and I'm just standing there talking about what a great person I am for what I did, and I'm not actually doing anything. It's the exact same thing that Warner Brothers has done here. There are problems out there in society, I won't deny that. There are people out there who commit violence. There are people who strictly objectify the opposite sex. And there are people who won't take no for an answer when pursuing someone romantically. Those problems do exist. I don't think for even a second, however, that the reason those problems exist is because they watch cartoons. In fact, doesn't that argument also sound kind of familiar? What if we took the statement, Pepe Le Pew normalizes rape culture, and we switched the terms? Instead of Pepe Le Pew, let's say video games, and instead of rape culture, let's say gun violence. That sound familiar now? Remember the old argument that people who commit school shootings also play violent video games, therefore violent video games cause school shootings? There are still people who try and perpetuate that, but nowadays we have actual research that says outright what a load of crock that is. It's not true. Video games do not promote violence. If anything, they can be a good outlet to relieve stress. But the fact is, even if we didn't have that research, the logic still wouldn't check out. If violent video games was all it took to drive someone into being a school shooter, every kid who ever played a video game would be trying to bring a gun to school. And also we can go back even further than that to the argument that heavy metal music promotes suicide among its listeners. Again, straight up ridiculous, because if that really were the case, no metal band would ever last because they wouldn't have an audience. The whole audience would have killed themselves. Now, most people have come to accept these arguments as utter baloney. So, if heavy metal doesn't promote suicide, and video games don't promote violence, why are we even entertaining the idea that cartoons promote violence and sexual misconduct and all of that stuff? It doesn't add up. The fact is, if you're going to blame society's ills on things like cartoons, you've missed the point. You haven't just missed the joke, you've missed the point. You're putting all of your focus on something external. But what drives someone to do something horrible is an internal thing. That is an illness of the soul, a sickness of the mind. It doesn't matter what they're watching. And heck, even if you can draw a correlation to how somebody who did something wrong at some point played a first-person shooter or watched a Pepe Le Pew cartoon, the thousands upon thousands of people who did those exact same things and didn't do anything wrong, just went about their regular lives as though nothing had happened, those prove that there's no reason to pin the cause of it on those external sources. You've got to focus on what's internal. Fix the internal problems. Like I said, every single one of those things that Warner Brothers has done in the hopes of somehow solving society's problems isn't going to solve anything. Suppose all of these changes really are permanent. Suppose there are no future Looney Tunes cartoons with guns, no future Looney Tunes cartoons with Pepe Le Pew, and Lola Bunny now no longer has that feminine form, and never will again. You know what'll happen if those decisions really do become permanent? You'll still have violence, you'll still have sexual misconduct, and you won't have any cartoons to blame them on. So either you're going to start looking for some sort of other source, or you'll have to confront the actual source, which is not something around you that you can just throw a dart at and proclaim, that's our new devil. No. You've got to look inside. Now, of course, any of these decisions can be reversed by Warner Brothers at any time, if there's enough of an outcry. Pepe Le Pew could come back. In fact, we have an interesting template for how he could come back. He was eventually introduced to New Looney Tunes as sort of a James Bond pastiche, where he played up on James Bond's womanizing because he acted like a spy, but the character he was always going after, another spy named Claudette, always rejected him, and he never wound up with her at the end of any of them. And they work. They translate that archetype of Pepe Le Pew into a different context and still gets the point across without losing the point of the joke. But the decision has been made for us at this point. A decision based on a lack of information. A decision based on fear. Because let's be honest here, the only people this helps are the people at Warner Brothers. This is their way of staving off the Twitter mobs for a little bit longer by saying, look, see, we got rid of this thing that makes you upset. You don't need to attack us. But maybe they're just delaying the inevitable. And maybe we should stop capitulating to people who only know to destroy. But hey, what do I know?
If you enjoyed what you just saw, hop on down to the description for links to Patreon, DeviantArt, and all of our social media, as well as links for Operation Red Dragon, The Daikaiju Wars Part 1, The Occult Mafia, and Emerald of Maddox City, 3 original novels I think you'll really enjoy. Thank you all, and we appreciate your support.